Hello. Welcome to another destroyer inspection in World of Warships. And we are re-inspecting the Harugumo. Why? Because because Wargaming buffed it. Allegedly, technically, theoretically, ecumenically. Yeah, they buffed the ship in a way that I can really only describe as just a complete insult to player intelligence. I don't really know how else to say it nicer than that. To call the Harugumo buffed in this new update is disgusting. Um, just another day Wargaming proving they don't play their own game. Nobody really is shocked, of course. So what did they do? Well, as you can see by the absolute railgun shell velocity. Wow, look at it. Oh my god. These shells are they're hovering over the water. They're skimming the water to hit this Yamato at 15 km, aren't they? Yeah, they buffed the shell velocity. Shell arcs, I suppose would be a more technical term. At 15 kilometers, they're about half a second faster now. Whoop-de motherfucking do, buddy. What else did they do? Oh, yeah, they buffed the maneuverability, guys. Yeah. Probably the most frustrating thing, legitimately the most frustrating thing about playing Harugumo is, of course, that you are a fucking heavy cruiser when it comes to your maneuverability. So what did they do? Well, they buffed the rudder shift by 0.7 seconds. Ooh. You go from a 5.5 second rudder shift down to 4.7. Did they also buff the turning circle, which is worse than a bunch of heavy cruisers, and the actual reason why Harugumo's a brick and doesn't turn? Well, no, of course not. In order to do that, that would require Wargaming to actually play their own video game and therefore understand how turning actually works in their own video game. So, at maximum range, your shells get to the target about eh, about 3%, 4% faster. And you turn, yeah, probably about the same. You probably turn about 3% faster because, of course, once your turning circle is bad enough, like on Harugumo, the turning circle is over 800. It's 820 or 830, which for a destroyer is insane. Maneuverable destroyers have something like 600 turning circle. Pig brick destroyers usually have something like the low 700s. And then Harugumo is tooling around on just a hellaciously bad 820, 830 turning circle. To give a little perspective, we've got giant brick gunboats, right? Most people would call them brick gunboats, at least. Ships like Alvaro. Yeah, Alvaro has like 100-meter better turning circle than Harugumo, right? I mean, Harugumo has the same turning circle as, I believe, Elbing. Which is one of the most frustrating things about playing Harugumo is simply the inability to turn. And buffing the rudder shift by 12% just doesn't have any bearing on how fast you turn. And that's, it's kind of disappointing it's kind of like, why even bother? Um, the shell arcs, I will say, are kind of a whatever because I never really thought that Harugumo shell arcs were like too bad to use the ship effectively. I mean, sure, it's not easy to hit ships at like max range, right? Because typically in Harugumo, because you're so big, you want to play a little bit farther away, right? It is typically a good practice to take range on your captains. So you go from like 12.6 to 15 kilometers of gun range, right? Because especially when you're without your smoke, like if you're trying to farm open water in Harugumo inside of like 12, right? Your boat is slow, your boat is gigantic, your boat does not turn. So without the smoke, like you really want as much range as humanly possible. And, the old shell flight time out to 15 kilometers was, something like 13 and a half seconds. Now it's like 13. So, I mean, like, really? I mean, I don't understand. I mean, if we want to buff Harugumo, we need to make the turning circle better. Like, this is the problem. I mean, the problem with Harugumo is the turning circle. Like, uh, we have another ship. Like I said, Alvaro de Bazan is a similar size boat, right? Similar concealment. It has 100-meter better turning circle, and Harugumo does not become overpowered if we make it turn a little bit better. I mean, Harugumo is not a bad ship to begin with, right? I want to be clear. Like, Harugumo is a ship that's in, I think, kind of a weird position balance-wise, because it is technically good, but it's very aggravating to play a lot of the time. And to buff the actual, like, effectiveness of that kind of boat, I think is a questionable thing, right? So, you know, I wouldn't want this ship to get really good shell arcs, obviously, because if this ship had really good shell arcs, it would be, like, insanely toxic to fight against. Um, and I wouldn't want it to be like, Yu Yang maneuverability. Obviously, that would be also insanely toxic to play against. But I do think that we could buff the turning circle to like low 700s, 7 to 720, 730, somewhere around there. Alvaro de Bazan turning kind of a thing. And that would go a long ways to improving the experience of playing it. Because the main issue with Harugumo is it's preceded by Kitakaze. And Kitakaze is one of the most overpowered ships in the game on a tier-for-tier basis. Akazuki and Kitakaze both could just really honestly be the tier 10s in the line. And Harugumo could be buffed and become the super ship. I firmly believe that. I mean, Kitakaze specifically is fucking insane as a tier 9 destroyer, right? And so the problem is when you go from Kitakaze to Harugumo, you get 20% more DPM, but you keep the same torpedoes, the same smoke, the same gun characteristics. You become giant, immaneuverable brick, and all you have to show for it is, all you have to show for it is 20% DPM, which is really bad. I mean, you consider I would liken going from Iowa to Montana as similar, right? Because when you go from Iowa to Montana, in a way it's kind of like going from, this sub dog in my mouth is just are we even human? The answer is, of course, no, because we're in a submarine. He can't even, he's shotgunning me inside 2KM. It's just, we're not setting the rest, truly. But when you go from Iowa to Montana, a similar thing happens key to Harugumo, which is you lose the comfortability of play, right? You lose Iowa's speed, you lose Iowa's better maneuverability, just like on Harugumo, you lose Kitakaze's better maneuverability and comfort of play. But to compensate, when you go from Iowa to Montana, you get a 20% increase in HP, which scales with your improved heal, and you get 33% more guns, right? So, typically when you go from battleships, when you go from tier 9 to tier 10, your ship becomes 30 to 40% better. This is very common, right? Also with cruisers, typically when you go from the 9 to the 10, your ship becomes not 20% better. It becomes 30. Going from Buffalo to Des Moines is a 50% improvement, right? Going from Minnesota to Vermont is a 100% improvement. Going from FDG to Preußen is a 50% improvement, right? These are all very common things. Jutland to Daring is a giant improvement, right? It's very common to get a huge step up in tier 10. It's just the way Wargaming designs the game, unfortunately, right? Neptune to Minotaur, Drake to Goliath, Brindisi to Ven. Really, you name it. Typically speaking, going from the 9 to the 10, in, involves a very substantial increase in gun power and typically an increase in like combat effectiveness, whatever you want to call it, consumable power, um, X factor gameplay abilities, that kind of thing, and that just doesn't happen when you go from Kitakaze to Harugumo. In the grand scheme of things, gaining 20% DPM, 15% HP, and losing your good maneuverability is like just simply not a trade off worth getting to go from a tier 9 to a tier 10. And that's kind of the issue that Haru is in. And it doesn't make a lot of logical sense to me that because Haru could be every bit as maneuverable as Kitakaze, right? I mean, these ships could have identical maneuverability, and what would be like the reason? What would be the theoretical reason why that would be not okay? I mean, you guys have to keep in mind that even after the buff to the rudder shift, Kitakaze still has a better rudder shift, and Kitakaze has a 100-meter better turning circle. We just need to make the turning circle the same as Kitakaze, and then that removes like the major source of aggravation when you go up from Kita to Haru. And as always, we're looking at back-to-back replays, um, pushing into the B cap, and I think this game is going to kind of demonstrate. We already reviewed Harugumo a little while ago, but it's going to kind of demonstrate the point of that. Like the DPM is still kind of just up there with like, I mean, basically you really do pretty much have best in class DPM on Harugumo. There's a couple of ships these days that have slightly better pen, or sorry, not slightly better pen, slightly better HE DPM. But you're still pretty much like top dog in a pure slugging fight, right? So we're kind of trying to backcap here. We're radared by, if we look at the matchmaker, their only radar they even could have would be Yu Yang. So of course that tells me that Yu Yang is here. But I have so much DPM that this Yu Yang you see is like, obviously he's not even opening up on me. And the reason he's not even opening up on me is because, well, I have like twice his DPM, right? So the beauty of that radar, though, is as you've noticed, it's kind of it's basically baited this Tianjin out, and we're now in his smoke fire penalty. So that's why you see me like instantly hitting the smoke, right? Normally, smoke farming in Harugumo in the mouth of a destroyer is pretty sketchy because you're guaranteed to hit torps. But of course, it is a Yu Yang, so he cannot torpedo me. So is it worth using a third of my smokes just for this Tianjin? Like 100%, because just in the time it's going to take this guy to back up, I'm probably guaranteed like 15 plus, maybe 20k damage on him, right? And getting rid of the only guy with accurate fire on me, because the BBs are all like 13, 14 or farther away, and the Hindenburg is off the map basically for me. Yeah, if we can kill Tianjin, then there's no real support of any kind. But now we're going to run into the Z, and you're going to see me immediately switch to AP ammo, because you should always shoot the AP ammo at DDs. If they are flat, you have actually literally the highest damage output in the game against DDs with Haru AP. Harugumo AP is the most amount of damage basically any ship in the game can do on destroyers. Even something like a Z42, even if he takes the heavy AP skill, he actually has less AP DPM than Harugumo. But crucially, something very interesting happens when you are in AP fights against certain ships in Harugumo, like Z, ships without improved AP pen but do have good AP, is that the firing angles come into play. One thing Harugumo really does have as an asset is it has very good firing angles. You have 30-degree firing angles front and back on Haru. And normal AP without improved penetration angles can start to pen at 30, and it will pen at 45, and that's a linear probability curve, right? So at 37.5 degrees, half of your AP will pen, half of it won't, roughly, right? You have a 50% chance to pen. So at 30 degrees, you effectively have a 0% chance to pen, and it scales linearly up to 45 degrees. Now, my firing angles are 30 degrees. So if I am perfectly angled and still able to shoot all of my guns, none of the Z42's ammo will pen my hull. Now, he could hit the superstructure, but he's going to get overpens with that, right? So he could shoot the superstructure for very little damage. But Z42, one of the few weaknesses the boat has is horseshit dog-ass firing angles. Z42 has 45 degree firing angles, which are guaranteed full pen angles. So in an AP fight with the Z42, if we are both angled as much as possible yet still able to shoot all of our guns, all of my AP passes the ricochet check and full pens him. All of his AP will bounce or overpen my superstructure, right? So if you're ever in a fight with a Z42, something very crucial to know is that you just always shoot AP at it, basically. Z42 is one of the best destroyers in the game, make no mistake about it, but that is like its one weakness in a gunfight, is that the firing angles are really, really bad. And if Z42 is shooting all of his guns at you, you can just AP the fuck out of him. Almost regardless of what boat you're in. You see here, like, he's going to pop out, right? Unfortunately, I don't have the AP loaded, but I'm just going to sit here because he has such short smokes. And we know his Hydra was up when we came over to the north side of the B cap. So his Hydra's down now, obviously. So he's going to be at least another minute before he gets the Hydra back, right? So I'm just going to reverse because this guy's smoke is going to run out. And we are going to take this opportunity to get angled. You see here, we're not backing out flat. We're backing out, we're curling in so we can get perfectly angled. We're not quite angled all the way, and now we are, right? We're at almost exactly a 30-degree angle. So if this guy comes out and uses AP against me, he will get very little damage. Now, of course, if he wants to shoot all of his guns, you see the kind of angle he has to show, right? And we're just gonna crush this man. We're gonna hit him for like 3,000 damage every 2.5 seconds. He does barely any back to us because he's shooting AP and we're perfectly angled, right? So that is one asset Harugumo has against certain DDs. DDs that want to shoot AP but don't have improved pen angles. Now, obviously, against something like a Daring, that shit does not work at all. But then again, most Daring players aren't smart enough to load the AP anyway. So you are still definitely like in a pure slug fight, right? I mean, in a pure slug fight, Haru really kind of is still top dog at really close range, right? Part of the problem I will say with Haru when you're trying to slug DDs can be that if the ranges really starts to open up quickly, you start to suffer quite a bit. And the problem is that Harugumo is really easy to hit for any destroyer. And even destroyers with mediocre bad shell arcs, and again, obviously, anytime you can use the AP, you always use AP in Harugumo because it's a 40% increase to your DPM, right? So you always shoot AP if the AP is going to pen. But part of the problem is if the gun range opens up, even ships with floaty shell arcs kind of dog on you quite a bit, which is unfortunate. I should have just probably stayed on. But I mean, you see there, like, even bow in shooting his turrets, like, the AP still does, like, surprisingly okay damage. But I definitely should have just stayed on the HE there. That guy was pretty disciplined and went bow in. Being the easy target to hit nullifies a lot of your DPM advantage in a lot of boats, right? There's a lot of ships that on paper don't have like amazing awe-inspiring DPM. The ship that I always use as an example for this is Yu Yang. Yu Yang with the speed boost up is extremely hard to hit. Now, obviously, Yu Yang has bad shell velocity, right? So the worst in tier 10. You know, gearing and Yu Yang shell arcs are really, really, really bad. But the thing is, Yu Yang is one of the hardest destroyers to hit when the speed boost is up because it's fast, it's extremely maneuverable, and it's pretty small. So even in a situation where like a Harugumo is fighting a Yu-Yang, a ship that on paper Harugumo has like 50% more DPM, uh, a weird thing kind of happens where like if the Yu-Yang player is good, they basically trade one for one with damage against the Harugumo. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen at like 5 kilometers, but at 7 kilometers or so, it does happen. Um, so Harugumo's in this weird spot where it's like you win any 1v1 against almost any DD, but only at close range. But then the close range is kind of the range where like the maneuverability is a gigantic fucking problem, and you just like gobble torps pretty much guaranteed, right? So I don't know what the solution here is, I guess is what I'm getting at. Um, I think the solution is just to give Harugumo the same maneuverability as Kitakaze and call it a day. I mean, I think that's just what we have to do. Like the examples we talked about with like Montana and a bunch of cruisers, um, getting a 20% increase in gun power and a 15% HP pool isn't even good by tier 9 to 10 jump standards to begin with, right? Like to begin with, that's not even that good. But then it's also coming at the cost of 100-meter worse turning circle on a destroyer. And I mean, I don't think. Yet again, Yamamoto proving why it's the worst captain in the game, because if you get the Kraken and you get the insane Yamamoto buff, the game is almost guaranteed to be over. I mean, to be sure, the DPM is incredibly silly and incredibly goofy with Yamamoto buff on a Harugumo. You know, what is it, a 1.5 second reload? Yeah, 1.6 second reload. But unfortunately, like the game is going to end, so we're not going to get any value out of it. And this is typically what happens with Yamamoto Kraken buff. Is yeah, this is typically how it goes. The game just ends before you can make use of it. You either get it in a shit stop situation and you have no time to farm, or you get it when the game is over and you can't win anyway, right? It's just really unfortunate. It's like the best buff a captain can give your ship, but you're like typically never in a situation to make use of it. But I mean, with the buff on Harugumo, you are pushing like with I'm not running Fearless Brawler, but even still, this is probably somewhere around like 450,000 HEDPM. That Pen's 30. I mean, it's really funny, but of course, the game's already over, which is sad. So yeah, that is the quote-unquote buffed Harugumo, boys. I mean, it's an insult to your intelligence. Really is what it is. Huge. We definitely weren't kill stealing. Kill secures. Hell yeah. But I mean, we could look at the trade with the Z, right? We did 21k to him. And let's look at what we received back. We received 10 back, right? So we outdamaged him like 2-1. And really the main reason for that is we have good firing angles and he doesn't, right? So it's I just don't understand. I mean, maybe someone could help me. Maybe there is no understanding it. But maybe somebody could help me. I mean, in what world is buffing 15 km flight time by half a second meaning, like, how is that meaningful? How is buffing the rudder shift by 0.7 seconds but keeping the turning circle so bad? How does that make the boat any, like, does Wargaming not understand how turning works in their own game? We talk about this all the time whenever we talk about taking rudder mod on something. Like, part of the reason, right, there's basically, of all the ships in this game, 99.5% of them probably you don't take steering gears on. And the reason why you don't take steering gears on anything isn't necessarily, and we're talking about over prop mod, by the way, it isn't necessarily that prop mod is that good, although it kind of is. Prop mod is usually just better anyway. But part of the big reason is there's so few boats in the game that actually benefit from a 20% increase in rudder shift, right? I mean, if you have 1,000-meter turning circle, what the fuck does it matter that the rudder turns over 2 seconds faster, right? Like your boat doesn't turn any faster, right? Your time to 180, your time to 90 doesn't really change at all. And that's what's going on with the Harugumo post quote unquote buff. Is like your time to turn just I mean, I'll be honest, guys. If I didn't read the dev blog saying Harugumo got these buffs, I wouldn't know. I'm telling you right now, like, I don't play a ton of Harugumo. I probably play, like most people, maybe 10, 20 games a year, usually to collect research points. But if I didn't read the dev blog saying Harugumo is buffed with the shell arcs and the rudder shift, I wouldn't have noticed. Like, I wouldn't be playing this boat and just randomly go, huh, it feels more maneuverable. Huh, the shell arcs are better. Like, no, I wouldn't know. Maybe people who play this ship 20 games a day would know, but someone who plays it a few times a month, I just wouldn't know. I would have no clue that this ship got a shell arc or a rudder shift buff. Um, so it's like, what are we doing? Like, do we want to buff the ship or not? I mean, I don't think it really needs to be buffed. It's just that Kitakaze is so overpowered, Harugumo feels bad in comparison. Honestly, if you want my actual opinion on what they should do, they should nerf fucking Kitakaze's turning. I mean, they should give Kitakaze the same maneuverability as Harugumo. That's what they really should do. Because it's not that Haru is bad, it's that Kita tier for tier is insanely overpowered. So we could kill two birds with one stone. We could nerf Kitakaze, one of the most overpowered ships in all of tier 9, and de facto we would buff Harugumo by comparison. There you go. Let's do it. It's never gonna fucking happen. Equipment is just totally standard. I mean, you could definitely run engine boost. If you want to get like super silly and you're playing with a radar cruiser 100% of your games, you could grab the ledge mod. Um, the ledge mod on Haru is kind of completely useless if you play solo, to be honest. But it can be funny if you're like smoke botting a cruiser, for sure, because you just get an insane amount of action time. Now, the kind of sad reality is that even if you run Ledgemon on Haru, you're still a worse smoke bot than New Delny. It's kind of funny. But you could do that. But that's the normal build. We're running a pretty much totally normal build on the captain. You can swap a couple of these points to Superintendent for an extra smoke, which is totally valid. You could grab Fearless Brawler if you're a DPM slave. IFHE on Harugumo, I personally think is like complete bait. In World of War, in the Big 25, as the kids would say, where every BB in Tier 10 gets improved deck and side plating. Basically IFHE Harugumo helps you kill about 20% of the battleships in Tier 10 a bit faster. And then it horrifically slams into the dirt your time to kill basically every other ship that you fight. Especially some tankier ships with good platings. You're trying to farm something like a Bowen Moskva Petro Stalingrad. And people will say, oh, but if you take IFHE and then you take fire chances, it's like, yeah. Or you could just, have a 7% fire chance instead of 4.5%. So to me, I always value the fire chance on Harugumo. Also, you're aiming for superstructure anyway, no matter what. So, it taking IFHE gimps your time to kill cruisers. It gimps your time to kill 80% of the BBs in the game that you fight. It gimps your time to kill just anything else, really. So, to me, not worth it. Lower tiers, much more worth it, but not so much in the higher tier. So there's a few ways to build. I mean, you're obviously going to grab these 13 points no matter what. You could build more into like close range fighting, grab like Fearless Brawler, shift into Superintendent, because if you do want to farm at 12.5 kilometers max range, you're going to need more smoke probably. But I typically, maximize like the range farming, because there's a lot of situations in Harugumo where you can open water farm, a single battleship on your flank like, yeah, you can open water farm that, just not at 12. You definitely can at like 14 and a half, but you can at 12, right? Um, so I do like the range on Harugumo because it allows you to be open water effective at times. Um, Now, another build I'm not going to recommend, but I actually do run a lot, is heavy AP. It's definitely not like a good build, but it's incredibly funny. Um, it is really funny to fight destroyers with heavy AP Fearless Brawl Harugumo. I have often run that, swap this to this, and swap this to this. And then you have like 550,000 AP DPM when you're on half HP with some adrenaline rush kicking in. It's like over 500k AP DPM that actually pens DDs. That's really funny. Not a good build though per se. Um, yeah, I mean this is the problem. 830 turning. It's just this is why you don't turn. The 5.5 second rudder shift like isn't even bad, right? It's just that you don't turn because of your turning circle radius. So you compare this to Kitakaze, right? Kitakaze has a worse rudder shift. Well, this is, to be fair, this is, there you go. That's B hull. Um, Kitakaze has a point 0.2 better rudder shift after the buff to Harugumo, but look at the turning circle, right? And this is why Kitakaze feels like pretty nimble, pretty decently maneuverable, and Harugumo feels like a complete fucking brick. So I just think the solution to this is simple. And also, if you look at Akazuki, it as the same, right? So the fact that you go from, I want you to think about this jump, right? This is a crazy jump. When you go from Akazuki to Kitakaze, you gain 12% DPM because Kitakaze can run reload and Akazuki cannot, right? You gain 2 kilometer range on the torps. You send out 6 torps instead of 4. You gain 4,000 health. And you actually get, I think, better. Yeah, you get better maneuverability. Kitakaze gets 12% better DPM, better torps, better maneuverability than Akazuki. Like, the jump from Aki to Kita is just a straight upgrade in every conceivable way. And then the jump from Kita to Harugumo is just a DPM upgrade. Like, the Kitakaze is the problem of this line, right? Like, the ultimate issue with this line is that this ship is way too good. So all we need to do is bump this up to 830 and call it a day. That's it. If you bumped Kitakaze's turning circle up to 830, it would slightly nerf a very overpowered tier 9 gunboat, and then by comparison, it would make Harugumo feel a lot less bad going from the tier 9 to the tier 10. So that's what, in my opinion, they should do. They won't do that, obviously. This was a meaningless buff, though. If you read this buff on paper and you thought, oh, maybe Harugumo is like good now. I mean, it's always been good. It's not Kitakaze, right? But no, it's just a buff on paper. It has no bearing on the boat in any way, shape, or form, which is kind of disappointing. Basically, just a complete insult to your intelligence by the developer. That'll do it for Haru. Thank you for watching, as always, and we will see you in the next one.